The funeral parlor in West Newbury smells of flowers and regret. John Cena Sr. lies still in his casket, 73 years old, gone too soon, taking with him decades of unspoken words and withheld approval. John Jr. stands beside the mahogany coffin in his black suit, WWE Championship nowhere to be seen. Just a grieving son saying goodbye to a father whose approval he never quite earned. Then his brother Dan approaches, face twisted with grief and alcohol, and whispers the words that shatter everything. You know Dad never really believed in you, right? He thought wrestling was fake, that you were just playing dress up for money. He never understood why you couldn't get a real job like the rest of us. What happens in the next 2 hours doesn't just change John's understanding of his father. It reveals a secret that transforms 20 years of perceived disappointment into something entirely different. West Newbury, Massachusetts, October 2018. The Cena family gathers to bury their patriarch, John Sr., retired engineer, Navy veteran, old-school New Englander who believed in hard work, practical careers, and keeping your emotions locked away where they couldn't hurt you. 3 sons stand around his casket. Dan, the oldest, successful contractor who followed the family blueprint. Steve, middle child, teacher and coach who earned Dad's quiet approval. And John Jr., the youngest, the outlier, the one who chose make-believe over reality, entertainment over engineering. The viewing has been going for 2 hours. Hundreds of people filing past, offering condolences, sharing memories of a man who lived 73 years without much fanfare, but with steady dignity. Construction workers who knew him from job sites, neighbors who borrowed his tools and always returned them, fellow veterans who understood the weight of service and the value of silence. But the longest line consists of people Dan and Steve don't recognize. Kids wearing Never Give Up t-shirts, parents with stories about how John's movies made their children laugh, teenagers who credit his anti-bullying speeches with saving their lives. They've come not for John Sr., but for John Jr., paying respects to a father they never met because his son touched their lives. Dan watches this procession with growing irritation. He's buried his emotions in bourbon since morning, trying to process the loss of a father he understood, trying to cope with a brother he never understood. Dan sees these fans as validation of everything wrong with John's choices: celebrity worship, fake intimacy, people who think they know you because they watch you on TV. Look at this circus, Dan mutters to Steve. Dad would hate this. All these strangers treating our father's funeral like a photo opportunity. Steve tries to mediate, as he's done for 30 years. They're being respectful, Dan. They're here because they care about John, and John was Dad's son. Was he? Dan's voice carries 20 years of resentment. Because I remember Dad saying wrestling was fake. Remember him calling it grown men in underwear pretending to fight. Remember how embarrassed he got when neighbors asked about Johnny's career? John overhears fragments of this conversation while accepting condolences from a Marine veteran who credits John's support for veterans' causes with helping him through PTSD. The veteran shakes John's hand, thanks him for his service to military families, moves on. But Dan's words echo. Dad never really believed in you. The formal viewing ends at 8 p.m. Family gathers in the parlor's back room to process the day, to share stories, to begin the work of grief. Dan continues drinking. Steve tries to keep peace. John sits quietly, still processing hundreds of conversations with strangers who somehow knew his father through stories John never realized he'd told. That's when Dan decides to unload 20 years of suppressed feelings. You know what I can't stand, Dan says, pointing an unsteady finger at John. All these people acting like Dad was proud of you, like he understood what you do, like he supported your choices. John looks up from his untouched coffee. Dan, maybe this isn't the time. When is the time, Johnny? When? Dad's dead. He'll never get another chance to tell you what he really thought. So I will. Steve tries to intervene. Dan, you're drunk. You're grieving. Don't say something you'll regret. Regret? I regret staying quiet for 20 years, while everyone pretended Dad understood Johnny's choices. I regret watching interviews where Johnny talks about family support when Dad spent 20 years embarrassed by his career. John feels the familiar knot in his stomach, The one that formed in 1999 when he first told his father he was quitting his job to become a professional wrestler. The one that tightened every time he saw disappointment in his father's eyes during family gatherings. Dad never said he was embarrassed. John says quietly. Dan laughs bitterly. Dad never said a lot of things. That was his way, right? Keep it inside, don't make a scene. But I heard him, Johnny. Heard him talking to Mom when you first started wrestling. What kind of career is that? What happens when he gets hurt? What happens when he gets too old to play pretend? Each word lands like a physical blow. John has suspected this for years, has carried the weight of knowing his father never quite understood his choices, never quite approved of trading engineering for entertainment. He came to matches. John says weakly, he supported me. He came because Mom made him come. He supported you because that's what fathers do, even when they think their sons are making terrible mistakes. But believe? Really believe in what you were doing? No, Johnny. Dad never believed in you. He thought wrestling was fake, that you were just playing dress up for money. He never understood why you couldn't get a real job like the rest of us. The words hang in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, burning away 20 years of hope that maybe, somewhere deep down, his father was proud of what he'd accomplished. John stands up slowly. I need some air. He walks outside into the October night, Massachusetts autumn cutting through his suit jacket. 2 hours ago, he was WWE's face of the company, beloved by millions, respected by peers, successful beyond any reasonable measure. Now he's just a son who disappointed his father, who chose the wrong path, who spent 20 years seeking approval that was never coming. That's when Margaret O'Sullivan finds him. Margaret worked as John Sr.'s secretary for 15 years before he retired. 70s, Irish accent softened by decades in Massachusetts, sharp eyes that miss nothing, keeper of office secrets and workplace confidences. John, she says gently, I saw you come outside. Thought you might want to know something about your father. John wipes his eyes quickly, tries to compose himself. Mrs. O'Sullivan, thanks for coming tonight. Dad always spoke highly of you. And he spoke highly of you, too. More than you know. John shakes his head. My brother just told me the truth. Dad never understood what I do. Never really approved. Margaret's expression shifts to something between surprise and indignation. Is that what you think? Is that what Dan told you? It's what Dad told Dan. That wrestling was fake. That I was playing dress-up. That I should get a real job. Margaret laughs, but not mockingly. The laugh of someone who knows a secret, who's been waiting years to tell it. John, sit down. Let me tell you about your father. They sit on a bench outside the funeral parlor, under streetlights that cast everything in orange shadows. Your father was not a man who expressed emotions easily, Margaret begins. 30 years I knew him. I could count on one hand the times I saw him smile at work. But you want to know when those smiles happened? John waits. Every Monday morning after you appeared on television. Every time someone in the office mentioned seeing you on a talk show or in a movie. Every time a newspaper article about WWE crossed his desk, he'd cut it out if you were mentioned. John's breath catches. He cut out articles. For 15 years. Had a whole scrapbook in his desk drawer. Pictures from magazines, printouts from websites, program notes from events you appeared at. He'd spend his lunch breaks reading about your career, learning about the business, trying to understand what you did. The world shifts slightly. He kept a scrapbook. More than one. When I retired 2 years ago, he gave me a tour of his office, showed me everything he'd collected. Photos from your first match, articles about your championship wins, pictures from movie premieres. He knew more about your career than some of your fans do. John's voice cracks. But Dan said. Dan heard what your father thought he should say. Your father was old school, John. Men of his generation didn't brag about their sons, didn't express pride openly. They worried that showing approval would make you soft, would stop you from trying harder. Margaret reaches into her purse, pulls out an envelope. He asked me to give this to you if anything happened to him. Said you'd probably need to read it someday. With shaking hands, John opens the envelope. Inside, a letter written in his father's careful engineering script. Johnny, if you're reading this, I'm gone. and I probably never said what I should have said while I was alive. That's my fault, not yours. I never understood wrestling when you started. Seemed fake to me, like an elaborate joke I wasn't in on. But I watched anyway because you were my son, and I wanted to understand what you were passionate about. Took me years to realize I was asking the wrong question. Doesn't matter if the wrestling is real or not. What matters is the effect you have on people. Doesn't matter if it's entertainment or sport. What matters is that you found something you love, something you're good at, something that lets you help people. I've watched you make sick kids smile. I've seen you inspire people to be better than they thought they could be. I've watched you turn entertainment into something meaningful. Turn your platform into a force for good. I was never embarrassed by your career, son. I was intimidated by it. Intimidated by how big your life became, how many people you reached, how much good you did. I'm an engineer. I fix problems one at a time, usually problems only I can see. You fix problems for millions of people, problems of hope and inspiration and believing in yourself. I was proud of you every single day. Proud when you won championships. Proud when you lost with dignity. Proud when you used your fame to help others. I just never learned how to say it. Your mother always said I should tell you more often. She was right. She usually is. But I come from a generation that thought showing too much pride would make you complacent, would make you stop trying. I was wrong about that. You never stopped trying. You never got complacent. You just kept being better, kept doing more, kept helping more people. I believe in you, Johnny. I've believed in you since the day you told me you were going to make wrestling your career. Not because I understood what you were doing, but because I understood who you are. You're someone who commits completely to everything you care about. Someone who works harder than anyone should have to work. Someone who uses whatever gifts he has to make other people's lives better. That's not entertainment. That's not fake. That's the most real thing there is. I love you, son. I'm proud of you. I believe in you. Dad. John reads the letter 3 times before the words fully register. 20 years of doubt. 20 years of seeking approval he thought would never come. 20 years of carrying the weight of disappointing a father who was never disappointed. Margaret watches him process this revelation. He wrote that letter 5 years ago, after your first Make-A-Wish event reached 100 children. Said he finally understood what you were really doing, who you really were. Why didn't he give it to me then? Because he was stubborn. Because he was scared. Because admitting he was wrong about something was harder for him than writing a letter he might never send. John folds the letter carefully, puts it back in the envelope. Dan doesn't know about this. Dan knows what he needed to know to become the man your father wanted him to become. You needed something different. You needed to know you had permission to be extraordinary. They sit in silence for several minutes. Cars passing on the street. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, while John recalculates 20 years of family history. Mrs. O'Sullivan, can I ask you something? Of course. Did he really keep scrapbooks? She smiles. 3 of them. Organized chronologically. Started the day you debuted on television. Ended the week before he died with a printout of an article about your charity work. 15 years of documentation proving how closely he followed your career, how much he cared about your success. Where are they now? Your mother has them, along with VHS tapes of every match he could record, DVDs of every movie you appeared in, even some of the terrible ones. John laughs through his tears. He watched the terrible movies. Multiple times. Said he was trying to figure out what you saw in acting, whether it was something you really wanted to do or just something that paid well. Concluded you were good at it, even when the movies weren't. John stands up, letter still clutched in his hand. I need to go back inside. I need to talk to Dan. John. Margaret calls as he reaches the door. Your father was proud of all his sons, but you were the one who surprised him. You were the one who became something he never imagined possible. That scared him sometimes, but it never disappointed him. John finds Dan in the bathroom, splashing water on his face, trying to sober up enough to drive home. Dan. John says quietly, we need to talk. Dan looks up, sees John's red eyes, assumes he's been crying about their father's death rather than his revelation. Look, Johnny, maybe I said some things. Dad kept scrapbooks. Dan stops mid-sentence, What? Margaret just showed me a letter Dad wrote. He kept scrapbooks of my career. For 15 years. Every article, every photo, every mention in the press. Dan's face goes pale. That's impossible. John hands him the letter. Read it. Dan reads slowly, his expression shifting from disbelief to confusion to something approaching shame. I don't understand. Dan says finally. He told Mom he didn't get it. He said wrestling was fake. He said that because he thought that's what he was supposed to say. Because admitting he was proud might make me soft. Because men of his generation didn't know how to show approval without showing weakness. Dan leans against the sink, still holding the letter. So when he said you should get a real job, he was testing me, seeing if I believed in myself enough to ignore his doubts, seeing if I'd quit at the first sign of family pressure. And when he seemed uncomfortable at family gatherings, when people asked about your career, he was protecting me, deflecting attention, so I wouldn't feel pressure to perform for the family, wouldn't feel like I had to justify my choices at every holiday dinner. Dan reads the letter again, slower this time. Johnny, I'm sorry. I thought we all thought. You thought what he wanted you to think, what he needed you to think, so you'd make different choices, safe choices, choices that wouldn't worry him as much. But he was proud of you. Apparently prouder than he knew how to say. They stand in the funeral parlor bathroom, two middle-aged men recalibrating their understanding of their father, their family, their relationship with each other. There's something else, John says. Margaret mentioned Mom has the scrapbooks. Dan nods slowly. We should look at them. Tonight. All of us. An hour later, the three Cena brothers sit in their childhood living room, their mother placing 3 thick scrapbooks on the coffee table, like evidence in a trial that's been going on for 20 years. You never told us, Steve says to their mother. Your father made me promise. Said if you boys knew how closely he followed Johnny's career, it might change how you related to him. Might make Dan and you feel less important. She opens the first scrapbook. Page 1. A newspaper clipping from the day John signed his first WWE contract. Local man pursues wrestling career. The headline is modest, but the article is highlighted in yellow marker, margins filled with their father's handwritten notes. Page 2. Photos from John's debut match. Professional wrestling magazines John never knew his father subscribed to. Page 3. A printout from a wrestling website, analyzing John's potential, predicting his future success. Their father had circled positive comments, underlined phrases like natural charisma and work ethic. Page after page, year after year, 15 years of evidence that John Sr. wasn't just watching his son's career. He was studying it, learning about it, investing emotional energy in understanding what John did for a living. The most touching discoveries come in the margins. Handwritten notes like, proud of his interview skills, next to a magazine article. He handles criticism well, next to a negative review. Good charitable work, next to an article about John's community service. In the final scrapbook, they find something that breaks John completely. A letter their father started writing but never finished, dated just 2 weeks before his death. Johnny, I've been thinking about what to say to you for 20 years, and I'm no closer to finding the right words. You've become something I never imagined possible. Not just successful, but important. Not just entertaining, but inspirational. I watch kids at your events, see how they light up when they see you, and I realize you're not just my son anymore. You belong to all of them too. That's a responsibility I never had to carry. A pressure I never had to handle. I'm proud of how you handle it. Proud of who you've become. Proud that you're my son. I should have said this years ago. I should have. The letter ends there, unfinished sentence trailing off like a conversation cut short by time. John looks up at his brothers, at his mother, at the evidence of a father's love that was always present but rarely expressed. He was going to tell me. John says quietly. He was always going to tell you. His mother replies. He just ran out of time to figure out how. 2 hours after Dan's devastating words about their father's lack of faith, John understands that everything he believed about his relationship with his father was wrong. The disappointment he carried for 20 years was misplaced. The approval he thought would never come had been there all along, documented in scrapbooks and letters and careful attention to every detail of a career he thought his father didn't understand. The next morning, at the funeral service, John delivers a eulogy that acknowledges both versions of his father, the man who seemed withholding of approval and the man who was actually overflowing with pride but didn't know how to express it. "My father was a man of few words," John tells the packed church, "especially when those words were 'I love you' or 'I'm proud of you.' But I learned something last night. Sometimes love isn't expressed in words. Sometimes it's expressed in attention, in interest, in the careful documentation of someone else's dreams." He talks about the scrapbooks, about the letter, about learning that his father's silence wasn't disapproval. It was protection, respect, and a different generation's way of saying, "I believe in you." After the service, at the cemetery, John places something on his father's casket before it's lowered into the ground. His 2008 WWE Championship belt, the one he won the year his father started his third scrapbook, the one that represented the peak of everything he'd worked toward. "This belongs to you too, Dad," he whispers. "You earned it by believing in me even when I didn't know you believed." 6 months later, John creates the John Cena Memorial Scholarship for children of veterans who want to pursue careers in entertainment. Not because his father would have understood the entertainment industry, but because he would have understood the importance of supporting your children's dreams, even when those dreams take them places you never imagined. The scholarship application asks one question: how has someone believed in you in a way they never told you about? Because sometimes the greatest love is the love that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't demand recognition, that simply exists quietly in the background, documenting and supporting and hoping, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. John Cena spent 20 years thinking he disappointed his father, but his father spent 20 years being prouder than he knew how to say, believing more than he knew how to express, loving in a way his generation wasn't taught to demonstrate. The funeral that began with a brother's cruel words ended with the discovery that love doesn't always look like approval, support doesn't always sound like encouragement, and belief doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just quietly cuts out newspaper articles and saves them in scrapbooks, waiting for the right moment to prove that faith was always there, deeper than words, stronger than silence, more enduring than fear.